Picture the marble pavement of the Via Sacra in the hour before dawn, cold beneath your feet. The columns of the temple of Saturn are barely visible as gray shadows against a graying sky. For perhaps the only moment in a Roman day, the Forum is nearly silent. Nearly. If you listen carefully, you can hear the shuffle of sandals on stone. Dozens of footsteps converging from the surrounding hills. The salutatio is beginning. In the next 2 hours, this valley between the Palatine and Capitoline will transform from sacred silence into something extraordinary. The Roman poet Martial called it the interruptions that make sleep impossible in the city. Let us examine what those interruptions actually were. Quick note, this content is educational only, based on archaeological evidence and ancient historical sources. The Roman Forum was never just a plaza. It was the acoustic center of the ancient world's greatest city. Every morning, as the sun rose over the Esquiline Hill, this space filled with sound in layers. Each layer tells us something about how Romans experienced citizenship itself, not as an abstract concept, but as something embodied, something unavoidably public, something you could hear. To understand what the Forum sounded like at dawn, we must first understand who was there and why they came. The salutatio ritual shaped the Roman morning. Before first light, clients would gather at the homes of their patrons. These weren't employees in any modern sense. They were free men bound by obligation and mutual benefit. A client might be a shopkeeper, a veteran, a poet seeking support. The patron might be a senator, a wealthy merchant, someone with influence to trade. At dawn, the patron emerged. The clients greeted him formally. Then they escorted him through the streets to the Forum. His walk was theater. The more clients in your procession, the more important you appeared. By the time the sun touched the rooftops, hundreds of these processions were converging on the Forum from every direction. Consider this. The Romans had no concept of a quiet commute. The journey to work was the work. The salutatio ritual transformed every walk through the Forum into a public performance of social status. You couldn't slip into the office unnoticed. Your arrival was announced by the sound of your footsteps, by the murmur of the men who flanked you. Now imagine the acoustics of this arrival. The Forum sits in a natural valley. The Capitoline Hill rises on one side, the Palatine on the other. Stone buildings line the edges. Basilicas with their massive colonnades. Temples with their marble facades. Every surface is hard. Every surface reflects sound. The architect Vitruvius wrote extensively about how stone colonnades amplify and prolong sound waves. He was describing theater design, but the principle applied everywhere in Roman architecture. The Forum wasn't designed for silence. It was designed for audibility, for resonance, for making private conversations impossible and public proclamations unavoidable. So, as those hundreds of toga-clad men entered the Forum at dawn, their footsteps didn't just tap against stone. They echoed. They multiplied. The sound bounced off the Basilica Julia to the south, reflected back from the Temple of Castor and Pollux, rolled up the steps of the Curia where the Senate met. Evidence suggests that by the second hour after dawn, you could hear the Forum before you could see it. But footsteps were only the first layer. The shops along the Via Sacra opened early. Tabernae, the Romans called them. Small commercial spaces built into the ground floors of public buildings. Some sold food. Some sold cloth. Some were workshops where craftsmen made bronze vessels, repaired jewelry, ground grain into flour. The metalworkers began earliest. Bronze work requires heat, and heat takes time to build. So as the first light touched the Forum's pavement, you would hear the metallic ring of hammers on anvils. That particular sound, bright, sharp, cutting through the murmur of conversation with a rhythmic insistence. We might imagine a dozen bronze workers, each in his own small shop, all hammering at slightly different intervals, not quite synchronized, creating a kind of arrhythmic percussion that filled the forum's acoustic bowl and bounced off its marble walls. Then came the corn grinders. Rome imported grain from Egypt and North Africa. That grain had to be ground daily. The millstones were heavy, made of volcanic basalt. When they turned against each other, they produced a deep, grating sound, lower in pitch than the bronze hammers, more persistent. The kind of sound you feel in your chest as much as hear with your ears. The poet Martial complained about exactly these sounds. In his 12th book of epigrams, he wrote, "One cannot live for schoolmasters in the morning, corn grinders at night, and braziers' hammers all day and night." Then he asked, who can enumerate the various interruptions to sleep at Rome? What's remarkable is that the Romans built their most important civic space in an acoustic bowl. Every footstep, every conversation, every ritual chant, every hammer blow, all of it reverberated off marble and travertine. This created what we might call an architecture of audibility. Privacy was a physical impossibility here, and the soundscape only grew denser as morning progressed. By the 3rd hour after dawn, official business began. The Curia Julia opened. The Senate convened. Now the Senate chamber had doors. But evidence suggests they often stood open during sessions, partly for ventilation in a windowless stone building packed with 300 men in wool togas, partly because Roman political culture valued public witness. So senatorial debate became part of the forum soundscape. You couldn't make out words from a distance, probably, but you could hear the rise and fall of oratory, the rumble of agreement or the sharp exclamations of dispute. At the same time, the temples began their morning rituals. The Temple of Vesta was particularly active. The Vestal virgins tended Rome's sacred fire, which could never be allowed to go out. This wasn't silent work. It involved moving wood, stoking flames, conducting prayers that were prescribed by ancient formula and had to be spoken aloud. Add to this the animal sacrifices. Rome was a profoundly religious city. Sacrifices occurred daily at multiple temples around the forum. Animals had to be led up temple steps. They made sounds. The priests made sounds. The knives made sounds. And afterwards, the smell of burning meat mixed with incense and drifted across the forum's paving stones. The philosopher Seneca left us another crucial piece of evidence. In his 56th letter, he described living above a bathhouse. He catalogued the cacophony, the grunts of men exercising, the slap of hands on oiled flesh during massage, the shouts of vendors selling sausages and drinks. His point was about cultivating inner peace amid external chaos, but his description reveals something else. If this was the soundscape of a residential bathhouse, imagine the forum's civic soundscape. Imagine the same density of human activity, but with added legal proceedings, religious rituals, commercial transactions, political theater, all occurring simultaneously in a space no larger than 2 football fields. Now consider what popular culture gets wrong about all of this. Films about ancient Rome tend to present the forum as a serene space, pristine marble, dramatic silence broken only by important speeches delivered to respectful crowds. Think of the Senate scenes in Gladiator or the Grand Tableau. In Ben-Hur, the popular image shows marble silence and philosophical dignity, but the evidence suggests something closer, to a modern outdoor market. If that market were also a stock exchange, a courthouse, and a cathedral, all occupying the same 100 meters. Archaeological evidence reveals the forum's working reality. Game boards are scratched into the Steps of the Basilica Julia. Informal gambling, probably by clients waiting for their patrons. Graffiti marks the walls. Evidence of food stalls appears in the archaeological record. These weren't just monuments. They were inhabited spaces. Used spaces, worn smooth by daily human friction. The poet Juvenal provides our most vivid account of Roman urban chaos. His third satire describes wagons creating havoc at intersections, the slanging of drovers, the bellowing of cattle, being driven through narrow streets. Now, wheeled traffic was officially banned from the Forum and most of Rome during daylight hours. But the preparation for night transport began at dawn. Goods had to be staged. Animals had to be corralled. The machinery of distribution was always present, even if the wagons themselves waited for darkness. Romans themselves complained constantly about urban noise. This wasn't dignified silence, but managed chaos. The kind of chaos that made sleep difficult, according to Marshall. The kind that prompted Seneca to write an entire philosophical letter about maintaining equanimity amid disturbance. The Forum's soundscape reveals something profound about Roman civic life. It shows us that Romans likely experienced citizenship as something fundamentally public, something embodied in physical presence and audible participation. You couldn't be a Roman citizen from the privacy of your home. You had to show up. You had to be seen and heard. Modern civic life operates differently. We participate online. We vote by mail. We express opinions through screens. Our political discourse happens in acoustic isolation, each of us alone in a room typing. But stand in the Forum today, and you'll hear something else entirely. Wind through pine trees. The click of cameras. Voices. In a dozen languages, most of them tourists marveling at ruins they don't quite understand. The stones are still here. The Via Sacra still runs through the center. You can walk the same path those salutatio processions walked 2,000 years ago, but the acoustic context is gone. Most of the buildings are missing. No roofs to contain sound. No colonnades to amplify it. No daily rituals to fill the space with human purpose. The Forum is quiet now in a way it never was when it mattered. We have extensive written complaints about Roman noise, Marshall's epigrams, Juvenal's satires, Seneca's letters. They tell us that ancient Romans found their city almost unbearably loud, but we can never truly recreate the actual sonic experience. Sound is history's most ephemeral artifact. We can excavate pottery. We can restore buildings. We can translate texts. But we cannot record echoes from the past. We cannot press play on the specific timbre of a comb. 100 conversations in Latin bouncing off travertine at dawn. We cannot hear the exact ring of a first-century bronze hammer or the precise rhythm of a basalt millstone grinding Egyptian grain. Perhaps that's what makes the Forums lost. Soundscape so revealing. It reminds us that history isn't just what happened. It's also how it felt to be there. How it smelled. How it sounded. How the morning air moved differently when hundreds of men in heavy wool gathered in a stone valley to perform the daily theater of status and obligation. The stones remember, but stones are silent. What would it mean to design public spaces that sound like the Forum? Spaces where the architecture itself makes privacy impossible and community audible? Where you couldn't participate in civic life without being physically present and acoustically involved? We probably wouldn't like it. We value our quiet, our personal space, our ability to withdraw. The Romans would have found our civic silence deeply strange, suspicious even. A city that doesn't sound like citizenship might not be a city at all. Stand in the Forum ruins today, and you'll hear wind through pine trees, the click of cameras, voices in a dozen languages, but the sound we've lost, the specific acoustic signature of dawn breaking over the Via Sacra, when hundreds of Romans in wool togas shuffled across cold marble to perform the daily ritual of citizenship. That particular music is silent now. We can read Marshall's complaints. We can map the architecture. We can even calculate the acoustic properties of colonnades. But we cannot hear what they heard. Perhaps that's what ruins really are. Places where the soundscape has died, leaving only the visual memory of where echoes used to live.